when the children of Gaia heard her voice. You see, dear listeners, if one can consider the movement of objective particles in space to be the animate potential of the body, then one can say the movement of subjects in the void of awareness is the animation of the mind. Human beings have various relationships with the world around them and the world within them. The world within us is more unknown in current times. The world in front of our eyes is where many of the games of our attention lead to. I have had a vision. To be honest, this episode is inspired of a certain intuitive glimpse I've had in this lifetime of mine. Certain moments where there was just a stopping of all programs of effort and just the witnessing of a significance of one's own being. You see, the mind is either unifying or separating itself with the phenomena around it. Our individual consciousness has to do with how we see we are different, how the world is in some sense broken into categories. But the unification of the mind has to do with what is in common. That means a part of the brain is trying to see what's familiar, and a part of the brain is noticing the unfamiliar. And reality continues forth. We are creatures in space and time, and we are in some sense experiencing the shifts of space and time within us as well. I have read sentences in books where I have felt I was there, staring at the author write the sentence. I have read certain things in history where my mind has animated. Really, reality is about how attention is conducted. Many scholars have spoken about the Gaian mind. In the native tradition, there was a sort of acknowledgement of the spirit of the natural world. In certain Japanese approaches towards the unknown, the room the man entered, the man was the room he entered. And just this subtle awareness in the lifetime that you're not just in objective rooms, you're in subjective rooms, means that man has to find a relationship of his physical body with the laws of nature. And we must consider this, let me say it like that. And there is also a man has to find the relationship of his mind with with an experiential reality. So what that means is we can say a portion of the human life is existential continuity, and a portion of it is experiential continuity. Now, if you're an individual human being, and let us envision hundreds of centuries ahead of this moment, perhaps there will come a significance, a situation will arise where the person sees that the existential reality is more important than their experience. That means every human being who has found himself walking on a path towards a sort of sacrifice of their individual experience for their collective existence, that's a huge moment. What gave me a freedom to speak in 2014, a sort of opening, was really that I notice I am standing on the shoulder of giants. You know, it's like the same devotion that many sages have spoken about the relationship. It's not even just in religious context or Freud types of his parents or the archetypes the environment and society has given it to be better. What it is Fragmentation of mind, it's as if you are a two-dimensional being, objective and subjective, but you're only trying to handle things objectively, and the mind is going missed. Many people on this planet do not experience their minds in their lifetime. They do not realize that there is an independence of creation. Certain states of mind cannot be accessed unless they're generated. And nothing can be generated if there is not a sort of direction of energy through attention. You see, man stands in two universes, a universe of his creation and a universe not of his creation. The universe of his creation, man is made in the reflection of God. In other words, man is the creator of that which he witnesses. But there is also a relationship where the unknown has led to knowledge. You see, the concept of God was a counter response to emptiness. All that human beings have been doing in any sort of system of knowledge has been trying to find a way to respond to the hollowness of existence. And there are beings that can stand it, can endure the void, and there are beings who cannot. And the beings who endure the void, there are those who they have found their eyes beyond duality. There are non-dualistic viewers of the moment. It's totally possible to become that. That's another way of saying you attain the nirvikalpa samadhi state, at least in my books. So what I mean by that is that you reach a certain state where you understand the freedom of your experiential reality to be superior than your existence. It is true. On some level, you are a body that has a mind. The mind is in an objective domain, an objective law. That means the brain is so fragile that a bit of turbulence to the human body, and in some sense, it shakes its familiarity and commonality. You know, it's kind of this strange thing that only when you turn the radio to a certain frequency, suddenly the world has meaning. You know, and it's similar with our states of mind. And we as a species have not cared to study the mind because we trapped it in matter. Well, I was always fascinated. I don't know why, ever since I was a kid, when I was super young, like 8 years old or something, like I would watch these Greek cartoons, Greek mythology kind of made into a cartoon or something, right? And when I was seeing it, I remember when for the first time, the imagery of a titan, of unbelievable power, reserve, chained. That's really the game of ability, is it not? There's something you can do, but it has not been done. There is something that can be done, but it has not occurred yet. You see, it's all about the whole science got it right. Kinetic potential, kinetic potential. God's judgment is suggesting the potential of man. Man's decisions are the kinetic application. So you see, there is many ways. The world is really studying a system. Some people may think that to you see, there's a momentum from one's personal dimensions, and there's a momentum from one's impersonal dimensions. What I find myself to be at least doing in this moment as I'm speaking is that I am just a moment of being that's aware of internal phenomenology and is aware of external phenomenology and is finding itself at a moment where the free will can choose the introduction. You see, a person fears what they don't understand. And many human beings don't understand a lot of things. We as human beings have certain limitations to our perception. So we fear what we don't understand because we don't know what to do with it. And what that means is, to a sort of scope of knowledge, we cannot use the unknown. It's like, imagine somebody says, hey man, there's this room with incredible stuff in it, and the room has incredible stuff in it, but you go and you see there's no light in the room. Does that mean there's no stuff in the room because there's no light in the room? Just because you cannot see something, does there mean that that phenomena doesn't exist? Just because you can't see your brain, does it mean that your brain doesn't exist? You can, of course, see the brain. The dimensions, the laws of our universe are like an ocean. And a boat or a ship, let's say, is moving on this ocean, and this ship has a captain. The ship is your ego. The captain is the underlying attention that at some point infuses into natural movement. So you see, a mystic that has not cannot speak the language of nature is not a mystic. The language of nature is about experiential knowing, moving existential phenomena prior to just an existential knowing, moving experience. Nothing awakens the mind than realizing it's asleep. Nothing. You can continue in any. Imagine we create a virtual reality simulation. You can go on eons in this virtual reality simulation, not realizing, in some sense, that unless you wonder about who's experiencing reality, you cannot see beyond the who. I want to share something that's from my own science fiction writings. I'm working on a novel called The Messenger of Giants, and it is in some sense one of those greatest projects of my lifetime, this novel. And anyways, I'm going to tell you a scene from it, a scene that I'd created. The main character's name is Rasoul, and he has, it's in the year 5025, and there's a character named Justicar Nova. Justicar Nova is a robotic being, and in the year 5025, there's a robotic realm, and human beings have reached a sort of enlightened state where they're like angels for these robots. Not all robots can see humans, but all humans can see robots in some sense. So what happens is the main character, when he was a kid at school, and the human beings in this story live thousands of years. When he was a kid in school, there was a robotic, for the first time, the government, the enlightened society, the government of the novel, sets out this artificial AI kid in the school system. Long story short, this artificial AI kid becomes the leader of the robotic realms, and coincidentally is also the main character's childhood friend. Now, there's something about the story I've written which I cannot say until the book's out, but but it's that the main character is always known, and there's something that there's something unique about the main character. Anyways, so the story that I want to say is this robotic and the robot guy, Justicar Nova. He's like a shaman. He's literally like I've made him kind of like a tribal leader, like a tribal chief. So believe it or not, it's a robot that's acting like a shaman. So Justicar Nova is taking Rasoul, and he's telling him, in my hidden programs, I gained a vision that I must take you here, and da 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 da. Eventually, so this chapter specifically is called The Ocean on the Top of the Mountain Peak. And so Justicar Nova and Rasoul, these two beings, Rasoul is human, of course. Justicar Nova is this robotic being. He's taking him, and Justicar Nova starts giving Rasoul a history of the mountain, and says the mountain, actually there was this extremely. The robot is hilarious in how he speaks. The robot tells Yogi there was this divine program, this enlightened program. By the name of Adi Yogi Rinpoche, but the way I wrote it was in ones, just 1 1, and the O's are 0. So, anyways, the story is there was this incredibly enlightened female sage, and suddenly the voice of the cosmos commands her. She gets a vision that she has to climb this mountain, and the vision tells her no human being has climbed this mountain this far. And so she goes and she climbs this mountain, this snowy mountain, and she's literally like it's her will. Her objective being is kept by her will, and she goes up this mountain, and she reaches the top of the mountain, and this is the same mountain that Justicar Nova and Rasoul, the main character, Rasoul, the main character, they're both kind of going up this mountain, and Justicar Nova, the robot guy, is telling Rasoul the history, and I'm telling you the history is that this enlightened female sage, she goes up, she goes up the mountain, this snowy mountain, and at the top there's a hidden dimension. The peak of the mountain, there's a hidden dimension, which is a desert. And she ends up going from climbing the coldest mountain, and at the top reaching the hottest desert. And the voice, her kind of intuitive visionary guidance in the story, commands her that she has to go and sit at the center of this desert. And she is going there, and her thirst is becoming incredible. And in that moment, the voice voice tells her, you have to sit here for 300 years, I don't know, 300 years. She sits in the center of that desert for 300 years, but she experiences that 300 years in 3 minutes, as the way I explained it in the story. What happens is underneath her, suddenly, imagine a person sitting at the center of a desert. Now her body, as if she's on invisible glass, is just stands hovering, and from underneath her, this whirlwind, ocean whirlwind occurs. So in the story, I may be getting too into the story, but this thing that I wrote, pretty much the story is that this mountain is a divine mountain, and this female sage was the only person known to kind of go at the center of the whirlwind, kind of. Ah, this is becoming harder to explain. Pretty much what I'm saying is these two guys are going into this mountain because they believe this programmer named Dante. This programmer named Dante, who's kept millions of people into a virtual reality of heaven and hell. Do you know she's created a program called Heaven and Hell? And millions of people are just lost in this artificial virtual reality simulation. So Rasol and Justica Nova in this story are going to go find Dante, this person who in some sense has what do you call it? Has trapped the world in a virtual reality simulation. That's honestly the only reason I was sharing this story, to kind of get to a point, try to give you guys an image that really there are two things we can do. We can have a response or we cannot have a response. And the human design and effort in existence is based on its response to its world. That means what is more important than any idea, any belief, is the experiential response to every moment, the experiential alertness and awareness of the presence of the moment. And once the person learns to ride the waves of their attention, they become a creature beyond thought. And a creature beyond thought gets access to the mentor sphere. And what that means is, beyond the dualistic dimension, you observe all duality. So think of it as a sort of onion style multidimensionality of the evolution of a transmigrating consciousness from individual position into a collective one. So what that means is you become the observer of the void, you become the observer of the singular dimension, and you become the observer of duality. And you go a bit further above that, you become the observer of infinity. And once these various qualities become, sometimes you can say these are the philosophical context of the abstraction that occurs behind one's eyes. The subjective realm is kept within a sort of way the attention in the moment is. When the person realizes that their attention is the way, Tao, the Tao that one abides by in Taoism, and as Lao Tzu says, action through inaction, that inaction is actually self-awareness. You see, the self-awareness is an incredible word, because you see, it's the awareness. You're either a self that is aware, or you're awareness projecting a self. When you are awareness projecting a self, you're more as a mental phenomenon, which means you're existing on this planet as a field of intelligence, not as per se a particle or a particular person with a particular name or something. You have a, let's say, a purely energetic relationship with life. You know, when design enters vision, it creates shape for space. If we realize that we are subconsciously creating the blueprints to our meaning, and that subconscious process of blueprint creation comes into the conscious view, as man efforts to explore the terra incognita and uncharted territories of the unconscious, we will find a shift in the evolution of the consciousness. So what that means is, you can think of yourself as one universe. So the children of Gaia, it's a suggestion, really the idea comes from ancient thought that man's intelligence is the world's intelligence. The world's intelligence is the greater world's intelligence. The greater worlds will always be unknown to that which just considers a limit. So one can say knowledge is the greatest limitation to knowledge. And people are going to be like, what do you mean, Mr. Within? And I'll say, knowledge is a choice. A choice is a snapshot photo. A snapshot photo is a snapshot value. That that snapshot value is the architecture of the subjective movement. Life can be found in certain modalities. It can be found in a modality where it doesn't have meaning. It can be found in a modality where it has meaning, we don't understand it. It can find itself in a modality where the meaning must be created. It can be found in a meaning where the meaning is already there. Do you see? Your mind is literally like the eyes of your eyes. And really, the human mind is a natural phenomenon. So it will have a certain allegiances with nature. The representation of Gaia, of course, it's a word that comes to us from Latin, and it's Greek, from Greek mythology. And there was a significance that from chaos came order. There was Chronos, then Gaia. That means there is a secret that the earth holds, that it knows that we hold it too, and that we know everything is changing in front of our sight. And that change, that response to the change of the world is true knowledge. It is not, you see, you can have somebody know a lot about skydiving, but he's never dived into the sky. And you can see a lot of people know things, but only experience is left. Experience is like the gold where the lead has alchemically been purified. So what I'm telling you is at the end of this life, yes, the hands, even Alexander the Great knew this. You leave empty handed. Like when Alexander the Great passed away, he was on a boat that was burning and his arms were open. What is choice? When we have no choice. When I was younger, the concept of free will bothered me because there were certain viewpoints that I could see that it didn't exist. How could I have free will? I'm on a rock in the middle of space. Where's the freedom in that? I'm a temporary existential creature, light solar powered for a little while with consciousness and eventually a return to the void as an experiential presence. Really, what the most chaotic thing, and of course I cannot, on some way I can say it, but I am never saying it. Uh, and what I mean by that is that after some point, you cannot impose too much meaning on life because you see it's alive and it's unknown. When you see it's alive, imagine meeting a hero of yours. Imagine meeting somebody you're fond of, somebody who you will get overwhelmed in front of, right? So when you suddenly meet that person, what does that mean? That means you are seeing the activation of a subjective self through someone else. To be honest, that's what love is. Love is finding your true self in another. An atmosphere where resistance, unnecessary resistance, is never projected. It's natural. It's as if the person is familiar with the moment. You don't know how much of true subjective maneuverance has to do with comfort. If you are a tiny bit uncomfortable, the whole psychological constitution can focus the inevitable conclusion of all philosophical thought objectively. You know what that means? That means a philosopher could be sitting on a couch and suddenly feel uncomfortable and start fathoming the most deepest sort of existential kind of parallels to why The discomfort, the philosopher is going to be like, why am I uncomfortable now? Could it be because the world is a strange existential place where the designs are mysterious and they come and go? Could it be because it's too big to know, or could it be that we are too small to even being able to know the big? And so the philosopher thinks all these things, but the philosopher suddenly sees that the discomfort is because he's sitting on the remote control of the TV. Do you see all the subjective conclusions eventually were occupied by an objective attention? This is why, on some level, if you cannot observe objectivity in a content way, you really can't do much with your subjectivity, because your subjective realizations keep coming back to an objective landscape. So I realize this. I realize this. How can I be the presence of nature at the same time be a human being that's continuing as a member of civilization? And so this question was of fundamental importance, because it meant, like, where's the attention going? Am I caring for my personal realm more, or am I caring for my impersonal realm? Is the outer world more important, or is my inner world important? And most people you talk nowadays, because civilization is inefficient, they're going to be like, yo man, just live for yourself and be in the moment and fuck everything else. I've literally met people who they feel the purpose of life is just to exist in the moment, you know. And that is, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with nature just being there, but it's just that if you have a 4 billion year old advanced evolutionary technology as your mind, maybe it must be used. Maybe if you have a hammer in your hand, you must build something with it, not destroy. So reality is crucial, guys. It's something where its significance can become dynamic. You become a creative creature. That means you're defined by your creative abidance as the moment, through I don't know. You live the programs of life. You do not fear them. I don't know. How would I say it? The world is a movement of shapes. Consciousness is a sequential evocation of intelligence throughout the day. Yes, on some level, we can say we are alive and we're living, and we're individuals in a species, part of a species, part of a civilization, part of a species that is an extension of its earth, as if we are a seed planted in a certain soil, and we cannot ignore the soil of our own phenomenology as beings. And that soil is natural law. So what that means is, many people feel chaos came first, the Greek mythology, but there are also these views that the chaos only came where there was an order to break. And so that means, when we think about the cause of our universe, are we choosing to first see it design oriented, or are we choosing to see it as spatial and unknown? So if you think your cause is unknown, you will feel the effect is known. If you feel the cause is known, you'll feel the effect is unknown. So really, what that kind of samadhi liberated state is actually it's a switcheroo of how the emotions are arising for your external and internal. The person may look in the mirror and be like, okay, I see my objective realm. That part's check. Like you can, you know it's like, there's a confirmation of the objective realm. But when it comes to the subjective realm, how fascinating that with every whim of our attention, there is a unique subjective evocation. That means, I'll tell you, any movement is a shift of the antenna, the frequency of this antenna. That means, in states, in moments when you're calm, you will suddenly see a calmer effect to the laws of nature. in states where you're agitated and intense. You see, guys, there's two kinds of suffering. There's an external suffering and there's an internal suffering. The external suffering, we got to live with it or update civilization. The internal suffering, you bring upon yourself. You are the punisher of your mind. And when you realize this, you will realize how nature's mind moves. It doesn't speak the language of words, it speaks the language of simple acknowledgement of presence. And I always ask myself, how can I speak of a greater civilization if behind my eyes I haven't seen one? And when I saw a couple, I realized it is just about attention's direction. The world can become hell if your attention's in the wrong place. The world can become heaven if your attention's in the right place. The world can remain as earth if your attention doesn't go anywhere. And it is very intense. It is the greatest burden, the greatest response to the internal existential suffering for the creature raised in a dependent and conditional state to realize free will is nature. We are more than an elemental existence. We are also a non-elemental kind of rhythmic experience of this existence. So to study the mind means to study the moment. To study the moment really means to be the moment. That means here's a riddle. Here's a riddle for all the mystics out there. Uh, how can you study something you're being? What new thing can you learn from something you're already being? You see, life brings with every new experience a sort of weight that must be carried. The youth are forgetting this, and this is why their inner realities are being more chaotic. Now, if we are on the shoulder of the giant, regardless of our voice or how loud man screams in the ear of this giant, the giant is moving. That means man cannot tell the earth to spin the other way. But man can choose to turn the direction he wants. And really, we as human beings, guess what? Imagine like there was, you know what's better than being like a 4 billion year old kind of evolved intelligent creature? To be a to be a 4 billion year old kind of advanced evolved creature that realizes once the free will of the objective body, you see external enslavement, you as a human being, it is your right on this planet to have freedom of existential space. That means if life is considered of any value, life needs a space to occur in. Okay, so the external enslavement you see in third world countries, the richest people of that country are even slaves to the psychological restrictions of the nation. And for me, it is like we cannot free our bodies if we cannot free our minds, and we cannot free our minds if we cannot choose to see something else. So the issue with all this belief, I call it belief wars. All these belief wars that are occurring, the reason is because change is too scary to confront. It is the weak that fight. Because the strong are in some sense looking at the wars of the inner realms. You see, just because you're an externalized human being, And you can go through many challenges of your days, and you can even have a sort of Napoleon complex and be a sort of conqueror of your own reality. But eventually you're going to see its decency of abidance. This is one thing that Western civilization has surpassed and evolved beyond Eastern civilizations. The average human being, you can say the high school student in certain Western civilizations compared to Eastern civilizations, due to certain emotional freedoms, has a more acute understanding of human nature. So what I mean by that is people in Western societies are way more aware of their emotional truths. People in Eastern societies are way more aware of, in some sense, I would say, their sort of discipline. It's like one side of the world held the banner of freedom, the other side of the world held the banner of discipline. Do you see? Now, of course, it can be disputed that these cannot be just archetypes ascribed to land. But I'm just telling you, there's what are the options? Either we treat the words that we are saying as the objective phenomena, or we are sensitive to see the objective phenomena as in its own empty elemental kind of occurrence, and then the subjective phenomena is in our conscious imposition. So you can say consciousness is like a martial art kata, like it's it's one of those. It's a technique. Existence is a technique. And it's a technique that only the true self confronting the ever presence of the unknown can handle. You see, I consider two types of maturity, and this is strange of me to say, and I am in no way trying to promote a sort of hierarchical value. I'm just saying that I know when a person has an ability to live on this earth as if they never existed. You just see it in the eyes of the person. You see it in the eyes of that soul. It doesn't matter if it's a newborn baby or if it's like a person on their deathbed. It doesn't matter. You will see how far the eyes of that being have dared confront the truth, if any. So I'm telling you, you have to have strangely some sort of trust of your mind to use it. You know, it's like, can you call it faith when a person puts their foot on the gas pedal and drives? You know, driving is an incredible act of faith. It doesn't mean it has to be religious and rule your life ideologically, but I'm just saying, like, it's something where for me it was, I was thinking, is it a, do I need to find the ultimate story like Lord of the Rings? Do I need to find that ring that rules them all, that one story that rules them all? And I realized, no, nature is a garden. Nature is where many systems of intelligence have opened their eyes. Therefore, it is never about a personal truth, or your personal truth is a luxury. Your imagination is a luxury. Reality at its core, some, I don't know who it was, but somebody said the world is not obligated to make sense to you. I think a notable atheist said this. I don't know who it is, but and there's something very crucial there, that the world is not made, doesn't have an obligation to make sense to you. Just think about it. That means all your dreams, all your fantasies, visions, desires, hopes, salvations, heavens, the cosmos has no obligation. The emptiness that is holding all this matter has no obligation for the matter to be in a certain way. There are laws, yet those laws we do not know they're animate, you know? That's the savage truth of the philosopher. The philosopher, I call it, it's the silence. It's the automatic vow of silence that comes from a truly pure philosophical speculation. You know, that means there are philosophers who, it's as if you took that being and threw them in any other world, any other situation, they would again ask the same questions. But if you took the being and threw them in another kind of simulation, they would not even question it. Their soul doesn't yearn for the more, for the beyond. And the word is the beyond. These Mr. Within talks, I'm trying to be the lawyer of the beyond. To to say that there is no fingers pointing when the mind is a collective based intelligence, that means you got to ask yourself the knights. Many Western society idolizes subconsciously the archetype of the knight, the archetype of the hero, the archetype of, in some sense, the protector of the collective mind. Why? Why is there this archetype? You know why? Because it was the ultimate evolution of the individual life. This is why, regardless of how much you fly solo in this world, you will hear the hidden tears, the hidden cries of the nation. This is really what true morality does. The reason I find civilization is not moral, because if it was, the tears in our eyes would not stop. I remember seeing a picture, guys, on Facebook. It was like heavy. Like I was just having an okay day, and I remember opening Facebook and just seeing this picture, this meme. And I'll never forget. It's like I got shattered for the day. The picture was this kid, this African kid on the ground and skinny on the verge of death. And this kid, sorry guys, I'm getting a bit emotional here. I gotta drink some coffee. It was devastating. I'll tell you, it was a picture of a kid, skinny, on the verge of death, and there was a man with sandals walking by with a huge bag of rice in his left hand, and the guy was like blindly passing by this kid, and this kid on the ground had no strength, had barely any strength, and you could see with all his strength, the kid was just raising his hand. Sorry guys, this is a, it's a collective emotion. That's why it's making me tear up. But the thing is, like, just imagine that person. I remember, I think it was some comedian. He was saying that that moment where he went to hell and he was arguing with God, like, what is this? My family has to, my friends burn in hell. As I stand in heaven, as I'm welcomed in heaven. And the same thing is happening with the resources and hierarchical structures of the civilization. That means the those that are have great lives, they don't want to leave the gardens of their paradise. And those who are not in the gardens of paradise are just reaching. So once you suddenly see that your whole life you've been occupied with yourself, and then there is a world this vast and chaotic, you reach, you, failure is a gift. Failure is the highest divine gift. It is what the gods in the higher dimensions are jealous of. The failure that makes the eye. Regardless of the tears that fall, the number of tears that fall between the pages of history. Really what it is it's existential opportunity and how much it's allowed. The internet is setting an example of the ethics of man. So what it is like people go on social media, they create a digital self, and that digital self, because it can be more manipulated than their current condition of life, becomes their whole obsession. So you can say people are constantly playing with the image of self. Okay, now this image of self has found a sort of uh, collective integration of data. So what that means is suddenly the internet opened the eyes of a person in one country to the realities of another country. So now the same thing is going to occur, but on a natural level with the integration of the inner realms of people. So it's going to be when when the 8 billion rivers of imagination finally become one wave. That one wave is the inner renaissance. So really, sorry guys, I forgot to finish that thing I was saying. I got too emotional. I forgot. Pretty much that kid in that picture was raising his hand to a bag of rice. The guy was passing by, and Aldous Huxley had written a quote that was, "What if this world is another world's hell?" I forgot to mention that's a huge part. That quote was on the picture when I saw it, and suddenly I got shattered internally. So what it is value, and it is management of value. And really, the advancement of civilization has to do with a greater world. You imagine the future generations, the eyes of that children will look at a world where the child will ask itself, why? Why cannot, why can't I be redeemed by the honor of the cosmos? Why cannot, like you see, it's an exchange game. Because we think we're temporary creatures, we are resource oriented, and really, resources can be endless. Imagine, before, like 200 years ago, let's say, imagine 100, yeah, imagine 300 years ago, suddenly some guy found made some crazy inventor, made some next level inventor, made an invention that made all our power problems not an issue. So imagine the world didn't have to fight over resources anymore, and everything was abundant. We had strangely ended up in a utopia based on an invention. Now, we would ask, what kind of questions and activities would that civilization have? So when we are done as animals fighting over resources, what is next for the species? And I feel it's the reestablishing a relationship with the subjective realm. That is it. The human being doesn't have much it can do. You can just exist or you can live. And if you choose to live, that means you have to use the content of your life. That means everything occurring in your sight is a clue to your next decision, is a clue to the design of cosmic movement. It's very complicated. It's as if like the scientific experimenter has to now experiment scientifically on himself to to make sure the consciousness can have evidence. Management means imposing order into some sort of chaos. Life is the chaos. You can make it evil and then it's gonna haunt you your whole life, or you can just see it's like, all right, it's something that's here. Do you know? The good and the bad are walking the same streets. What are you gonna do? You know? We have to think of humanity 2.0, and then the children after us must think of humanity 3.0, and the children after them must think of humanity 4.0, and it's going to be a collective metamorphosis. That means it's going to be conscious evolution on a collective scale. We have to fall in love with the experience of nature and the natural again. And somebody said this to me once, that the whole psychedelic phenomena and drug culture that's occurring in America and spreading to the world, it's a backup system to a civilization becoming unnatural too soon. There was that kind of thought. You see, it's always easier to break something than build it. Buildings take a long time to build, but in one day they can be demolished. So when an idea approaches to one, the easiest thing is to let go of it, reject it, not care for it, not wonder about it, just to forget it. That's the easiest thing to do, to break it. But it's much harder to understand why it was made in the way it was, and realizing that why, that question mark, appeared in man. We created our questions as much as we're responsible for their answers. We're responsible for the questions that move our mind. Look at this picture I've chosen. Look at the vanishing point of the light at the end. That vanishing point doesn't mean there's nothing beyond that light. It just means from this moment we cannot see beyond the vanishing point of subjective reality and objective reality, which is, to be honest, a state of being. So strangely, man doesn't travel to higher dimensions, he becomes them. In a book I wrote a while ago, in such a strange way, the book, I pretty much would take my phone. I was inspired by Salvador Dali, who was known to put a spoon on his knee, and as he was drawing his surreal paintings in the semi-awake state, anytime he would fully fall asleep, like the spoon would fall into a bucket he would place beside it, and he'd suddenly wake up and continue in that semi-conscious state drawing. Do you know? So what I would do is I would grab my phone, I would just get ready for sleep. I would go in bed, just like get ready to sleep with a blanket over myself. And suddenly my left hand would hold the phone, and I would just press record, and I would just breathe a couple times deeply with my eyes closed on the pillow. And I would suddenly be in a sort of acceptance of stillness to subside. Acceptance of stillness where just like I'm just calm. You can say before one falls asleep, they're extremely calm. Okay, so I reached that sort of extremely calm state, but because I was speaking, it was as if aware that I was in the bed, my head is on the pillow. I was in some sense strangely not thinking, but I was aware of thought. And I was aware I'm in the bed, and I was just speaking. And I would hold the phone, and it would be like an hour I would just speak on this phone. I was conscious, I could hear myself, but I was also aware that I was not putting any effort, and I was just there. I was just there, you know. They asked this guy, "How do you find heaven?" He's like, "I realized Earth wasn't heaven. I realized underneath all the suffering I have interpreted that this world has caused, I am responsible for manifestation in space, at least in the domains of my free will." So it's an empowerment. Independence may feel uncomfortable, but internal independence may feel uncomfortable, but it is a power. And it's not an egoic power. It's just an ability to acknowledge, just like how we observe objects, like a person looks at a statue, they don't go like, hug the statue, you know what I mean? They just look at it and they move by. Similarly, we must have a similar relationship with our thoughts. So that's one thing we can do, that we can treat our imagination like physical reality, not consciously, not in a we just get locked in the inner reality and see nothing else of the outer world, and then get shredded in the uh, in an unjust system. Like what I'm saying is, we have to ask ourselves if we want an advanced civilization. I think everybody wants an advanced civilization. Who doesn't want to see how at least that advanced civilization looks like? So everybody, we can say, wants an advanced civilization. All right. So how this advanced civilization may arise is, okay, on one level, a return to the Gaian mind, a return to the children of Gaia, hear the voice of the cosmic landscape in abidance with the voice of the subjective realm, in abidance to the moment's instantaneity prior to any voice, and then the observer, that it's like at that point, there's no knowledge that interprets that, the knower is moving. You see, any moment in history, any human being had a capacity to see beyond their simulation of life. It's just that they have never had as much ability as we have today in 2020 to communicate it. And really, that's our evolution. If you want to say objective evolution, no, there has been a strange stasis in regards to our objective evolution, or it's so, of course, it's so gradual over a long scale of time that we don't even notice it. But I'm saying, like, it's our minds that have moved, that have taken more space in the moment of being. So children nowadays have more subjective realism, you know. Anyways, so really, all of knowledge comes down to a philosophical argument of, can we see outside of the box or not? If we can't see outside of the box, your best bet is that you create your truth in this life. If you experientially somehow know or feel you can see outside of the box, then you'll know that it is not administered by categories. That means God, it's like, is not a word in a dictionary. You know, how could people define God in the dictionary, even the concept, when the concept is beyond creation and destruction? Literally, it cannot be created or destroyed. What is this? It's an unknown variable. So what it means is, it's the yin yang symbol effect, where in the knowledge of all humankind, we're finding a circle. And for a long time, I was thinking about the yin yang symbol in a kind of three-dimensional way, and I got this conclusion: oh my god, what if the circles in the yin yang are both like the black circle and the white part, and the white circle and the black part? What if those two circles are the same? They are actually a tunnel. Okay, and then I thought, what if it's like a whirlpool? What if in an ordered universe, all of it gravitates, orbits as a chaos? What if in a chaotic universe, all of it orbits an order? And that's how I got introduced to how we have to pilot through our subjective realms. That means there are not just outer forests to walk, but there are inner forests to ponder about. We have to realize that any sort of information on this is helpful. Any human being that authentically, honestly cares to share their inner realm with the outer world, what else can we do with our inner realm? It either remains silent or it vocalizes. That means, I think statistics should prove probably that the more you stay in a store, the more you feel you have to have a relationship with the environment. A bunch of people stuck in an elevator will eventually get to know each other. Life is fascinating, and it is beyond our own definitions. That's what I'm saying. And by the way, guys, I wanted to introduce a concept for the viewers at least. I was thinking that if I was listening to my own talks as a viewer, how would I question it? And I realized the best thing that I would appreciate if the viewers can do is um, sharing imagery that, how can I tell you? It's like, sometimes the moment happens once, and only once you can say. What I mean is that it's really fascinating. It's a game between conditions and the unconditional. Nature's return. Do you know there was a person named Swami Krishnananda? from Vedic schools of thought, he had this view that he said religion is God remembering himself, as if their man never existed, it was all God. So it's as if, ain't to be honest, there is a branch of mystical thought that feels we're the imagination of God right now, you know? But a God that is not of mortal comprehension, do you know? It is not non-dualistic, so what can you do at Veda, you know? The moment you hear Advaita, that means if you go into it with questions, verbal questions, it's meaningless. This is why so many people, I find Westerners have gone to like India and they've asked questions, and the guru's been like, "Stop asking," because really it's not linguistic. We are creating and simulating our own relationships in life. So, anyways, guys, the freedom of vision to be itself beyond itself. Beyond the language threshold experience, we need a new language to contain that experience, a higher dimensional language, which I think geometry fits the requirement. I honestly feel geometry is going to be the next language of all languages. All branches of all knowledge are coming to a geometrical trunk. There was a French philosopher by the name of, oh my God, what was his name? Let me Google this. Oh, there we go. There's a French philosopher named Albert Camus. I'm going to read you a main quote that's ascribed to him, but the thing I wanted to tell you is another story of him. So, Albert Camus says, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an in." Okay, let me read this again. "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. And that makes me happy. For it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me there's something stronger, something better pushing right back." He has also this other thing where he says genius ideas can come even when you're going through revolving doors of like a building. The effort of vision. So many human beings in history. We're getting to close to a population of 8 billion, But to take the scale of all the human beings that have ever existed, it is an incredibly large number. And so the effort of all these human beings has been to build something. And really, the inventor's mind has a sort of celestial purity to it. That means I totally understand the importance of keeping love alive in civilization, for human psychology to be able to rekindle itself in many ways, you know? But as there are those as there are the lovers, there are also, in some sense, how can I tell you, the protectors. And what that means is there, right now, as I'm speaking, there are certain human beings in civilization, whether they know it or not, their archetype is just has a design closer to the protector dynamic. So underneath all that they are doing in this life, they still want this world to be here. You know, those are human beings who you can say they can never be bad. Even if they are, they can never be. Because their original vision does not start with inefficiency first. There's I'm gonna go into some, I'm gonna tell you some unique religious stories that they're kind of interesting. Like they have certain psychological pointers in them. There's this story about this Muslim man, and back in the day, I'll tell you this. This man, this Islamic man, he goes and he suddenly sees a group of people worshiping a tree. Back in the day, okay. He sees a group of people worshiping a tree, and he's like, he first comes up to the people and he's like, "What are you guys doing?" And he's like, "This tree is our God. This tree is God, man." You know? And this Muslim man, of course, many people must know this. The Islamic thought is one where the most fundamental core liberating value of the whole ideology is that there is no partner to truth, to the ultimate truth of whatever. The ultimate truth of creation, there is no partner to the creator. So in that moment, this Islamic man says there is only one God, and that is Allah. And it's not extreme or anything, guys. Extremism is a political situation infused with a religious narrative. That's it. You know, the world is freer than its fear. You know. So, anyways, this man says no. There's one God, and that God is not an object. It was as if back in that day, the mainstream was more up to date than idol worship, right? Or idol worship was like old school, pantheistic movements and whatnot. So, anyways, this man says, "I am bringing an axe, and this tree is not God." And so the people get startled, and he gets an axe, and he comes. In that moment, he's about to, what do you call it? He's about to cut the tree, you know, and suddenly the story says Shaitan, the devil, the archetype of the devil appears through a person and says, "I will not let you cut this tree." And so the devil in human form fights with this guy, fights with this man who says there's one God and that God is Allah, the creator, one creator, So it's like a person who feels there's one truth is fighting the deceiver of truth, okay? And so what happens is the guy says, no, there's one God and it's not this tree, and he fights the devil, and in some sense he beats the devil in human form. That means he's stronger than the guy he's fighting, the evil that he's fighting. And in that moment, suddenly there's a saying that they say the devil, I don't know, tries to attack your character. So in that moment, what happens is tries to appeal to your character. So what I mean by that is that in that moment before, like this guy cuts the tree, Shaitan looks at him and says, "Listen, don't cut this tree. and I will put 3 gold coins. That was like next level money back in the, like 3 gold coins every night behind your door. And I'll knock every time I've put it. And the guy suddenly, he's like, I need the money. And he like put his axe comes down and he doesn't cut the tree. And he's like, it better be there. And he leaves. And he doesn't cut the tree. That night he waits. Suddenly hears a knock, opens the door, sees the 3 gold coins. And he just takes the gold coins, and next night comes up, it's knock again, there's 3 gold coins, and then suddenly, third night, there comes a knock, but there's no gold coins. And so this guy's like, oh my God, this is like, excuse me, but he's like, this is bullshit, and so he takes an axe, and he's like, I'm cutting the tree. And he goes to cut the tree, and suddenly the same figure, Shaitan, appears and says, I won't let you cut this tree. And they fight. And this time they fight the same kind of personification of the archetype of the fallen angel. So in that moment, it's like Shaitan says, Jesus Christ. Shaitan doesn't say Jesus Christ in that moment, but like what happens is Shaitan beats the guy, overpowers him. The guy falls down shocked, and he says, how is it that, this is the moral of the story, guys. He says, how is it that when we first fought, I could defeat you? I overpowered you. How is it that now you're defeating me? How are you stronger? And this is the moral of the story, where Shaitan looks at man and says, when you fought me before, you were fighting for your truth. But now that you were fighting me, you were fighting for your desire. That means you let go of your authenticity for the sake of the future reward. So that's the moral of the story. You have a choice in this life. Do you want to live through your eyes? And if so, you got to get to know him. And that's pretty much what meditation was. Getting to know your mind. Because you got one lifetime to do so. And the sooner you learn to play this instrument, the sooner the world can hear the melodies of its efforts. Really, it's the heart of the human being that keeps them in eternal. That means it was the archetype of Socrates had a sort of hidden care for the future. That means, like there's some philosophers in history, I call them the mighty ones. These philosophers in history, guys, their ideals, what they lived for, and their truths were so in alignment with universal truths that years later, they just became, their voice never faded. I remember there was a story of these two brothers. I don't know from what culture the story is, but there were these two brothers that one of them was really outspoken, and he went out in town and he he was very popular. He was a popular writer of his time. And the other brother just wrote one book. But the story finishes off with thousands of years later, that one brother's book sticking around more than that person who everybody was hearing. And you know why? You know why that other brother's voice stood around? Because that person shapes their boxes you go in. The world is too dynamic, therefore, it's a living response. So the secrets of the mind are not thoughts, they're not philosophies, they are living experiences. I find myself just being an energetic expression. This is why, regardless of whatever outcome, they say energy cannot be created or destroyed. So as long as there is some sort of consciousness to energetic simultaneity, as long as the consciousness is still simultaneous with an energetic manifest objective existence, so it's like the stories can entertain. The reason I say to be playful with language, because there will come a moment in every person's life where they must enter the exit. And that means that you have to realize, believe it or not, I'm not trying to say this intensely, but we're all here for a little while. So suddenly, what does the concept of fear mean in that scale? What is the concept of shyness or inefficiency of character mean? We have no time to live in our mistakes. That is the reality of life. I call it, it's like violin strings. There's this, violin is a divine instrument. And there's this way where it just goes up the octaves that it can be incredible. It can be illuminating. Violinists are like, they're kind of like, I don't know, but it's just like how like in like a eureka moment a person can like imagine violin. It's an upliftment due to the trust of the rhythmic experiencer. That upliftment brings its own subjective phenomena. So just like how a lion has to hunt its own prey, your mind will not trust phenomena unless it originates it. So you as a being have to start originating phenomena in the newest way. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean it means any human being that ever has a problem, even Einstein said it, this answer is not going to be seen with the same eyes. Albert Einstein says the same consciousness that created the problem is not the same consciousness that's going to solve it. That's when I realized like Einstein had such a vast subjective outlook on the world that there was a reason this dude didn't care about like his socks being different or his hair. He didn't care about it. And I was like, why didn't this guy care about it? And I realized because his mind was in the presence of grander questions. What you find civilization, I mean, honestly, I thought like, okay, let's say we have the potential for extraterrestrial contact as a civilization, with for the first time a galactic, truly embodied archetype. And so I would be like, okay, let's say like Fermi's paradox, where are the aliens? Where's everyone? So it's like, if they came, if we suddenly, our future self, like imagine we went through a time machine back in history, but we saw it from from an aerial view. Life. Sorry guys, I'm getting kind of like multiple thoughts at the same time. Sometimes there's like a lag in my choice of them. I honestly find that we are natural beings. To some degree, we can, through our sensory perception, explore reality, but ultimately, it's the experience of the moment to moment living of the human being that is really important. The thing is that we reach a sort of threshold of like a certain realization as a collective that the world, paradise must be built. And to build paradise means the potential of the civilization must be at least conceptualized. That means children of the future generations have to start wondering, what is this? What is this, 4 billion-year-old science project called civilization? So we have to consider this. We have to be responsible for our creation. As parents feel responsible for their children, human beings must find themselves responsible for their civilization. The civilization is the mind of your child. The world tomorrow is the world for whoever dwells in the tomorrow. I want to read for you a quote from Khalil Gibran. And it's an incredible quote that I think every parent in the world should know this. Just read this once in your life and you'll realize the ultimate goal of human evolution in continuity. Khalil Gibran, he says his poem is called On Children, and Khalil Gibran is this next level Lebanese poet, one of my top favorite poets. Do you know? That means anybody who knows Khalil Gibran's poetry is like instantly like I feel like a friend of their mind. But the thing is, Khalil Gibran says, "Your children are not your children." His poem is called like it's on children, and he says, "Listen to this, guys." He says, "Your children are not your children." Imagine being a billionaire parent listening to this. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrow may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. This means the universal condition has brought forth the need for a creature to, in some sense, be the support system for the future. The future is the arrow, and the present is the bow which the arrow is sent forth from. You see? And he says the psychology, right now it's strange because the heroes the civilization needs is the patient. Those who are not running. Those who are willing to take steps towards the civilization where, believe it or not, most human beings are trying to get out of it. It's like, imagine taking 4 billion years to remodel and build your home, and then you suddenly realize you're running away from your own home. Because why? Because it's inefficient or whatever. Civilization is the glare in the children, in the eyes of our children's children's children. Humanity's efforts are where the ship is steered. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And they asked, how can I say it? It's like Da Vinci says, to develop a complete mind, study the science of art, study the art of science, learn to see, realize how everything connects to everything else. This is ascribed to Da Vinci, this quote. And you can see it makes sense because this dude was writing, was like drawing with his, writing with his left, writing with his right hand, and drawing with his left, I believe. So the science of art, the art of science, discovered the symmetrical laws of knowledge, the self-reflective laws of knowledge, learn to see, and then realize how everything connects to everything else, regardless of what part of the narrative of what content of your moment of being you choose to, for the attention to embody. You are actually your whole moment of being. That's it. I don't think there's a soul. There is no. It's not like a Casper TV show or something. It's it's like there's no ghost. There's no such thing as a ghost. There's just antennas that are receiving waves. I don't know how to say it. It's like the psychology is animated in accordance to the inspiration. But what I mean, there's no soul. I mean, like the soul of your soul is your whole moment. So truth could never go anywhere. It's where it always was. The greatest clue to the divine mystery that what is behind our eyes and in front of our eyes is the same moment of being. So anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings and namaste.